So when last we spoke, Bob was leaving for America to try to earn money to start his own record label because he'd been so disappointed with all the lack of financial rewards. At one point, the Wailers had 5 of the top 10 singles at once on the charts and never got more than £3 a week, which is about $6, $7. So Bob goes to Delaware and he works sweeping the floors in the DuPont Hotel in Wilmington until Uncle Sam comes for him and says, we have this groovy little thing going called the Vietnam War. And Bob says, I don't want to be part of that, and gets on the next plane for Kingston with just enough money to start his own record label, which they're going to call Waylon Solar, a combination of the Wailers and the Solettes, group that Bob had been coaching with Rita Anderson. And they decided as a peacekeeping gambit to record their first solo song in Coxon's studio called Freedom Time, a cry of liberation from the oppressive producers. And Coxon immediately bootlegged it. So they were glad to be away from him. Now the Wailers always had one overriding ambition. It was to earn enough money so they could build a house where they could live communally with their families and have a studio in it, so whenever inspiration took, they could go down to the studio night or day and record their music. And that never really happened. They never could get enough money in front of them. Now that they had their own label, they had to pay for the pressings of their records. So they never got enough money in front of them to achieve that goal. And by 1967, Bob got a serious case of writer's block. And he went back up to 9 Mile and lived for a while with Bunny and Peter and Rita working in the fields. Peter couldn't stand the silence. He lasted a week and came running back to Kingston, but the rest stayed there. And Bob always worked in the fields barefoot, and one day he left a razor-sharp hoe facing upwards on the ground and forgot about it and stepped back on it and almost sliced his right foot in half. And the right foot is where the cancer was first discovered in the big toe. However, melanoma cancer does not arise from injuries, but that foot was always being stepped on. He played soccer barefoot, and people would step on it all the time, and it was an injury in '77 in France that led to the discovery of the melanoma cancer, which was already 3rd stage when they discovered it. And they wanted him to take the toe off, but he couldn't get 100% guarantee that that would stop the spread of the cancer. But I jump ahead. So Bob's up in 9 Mile, and he finally gets his act together. They come back to Kingston. In the beginning of 1968, they meet a guy named Danny Sims. Danny Sims is the mafia-adjacent partner of Johnny Nash. Remember I Can See Clearly Now? Yeah. And they discover Bob and Peter and Rita. Bunny is in jail for 14 months on trumped-up ganja charges at the time. So Jad Records, Johnny, Arthur, Danny. Arthur is Arthur Jenkins, their producer. Jad Records signs Peter, Bob, and Rita to a 4-year contract as performers and composers. And Johnny Nash starts recording a lot of Bob's songs and having hits on the American charts. But they could never get the Wailers' own recordings of their music on to get airplay in America. I mean, late 60s, psychedelic rock, you know, The Who, people like that. And semi-doo-wop in a patois language didn't really connect with anybody on American radio, so they couldn't get their own airplay. And finally, in 1970, they hook up with Leslie Kahn, who had recorded Judge Not for Bob. And Leslie Kahn has had tremendous international success with My Boy Lollipop and The Israelites by Desmond Decker, both top 5 hits in America and England, and each of them selling 5-6 million copies. So again, they have great promise. They're going to sign with him, and they're going to do something nobody in Jamaica had done before. They're going to make an album of all original material. And when it's time to come out, Kahn tells him he's going to call the album The Best of the Wailers. And the Wailers get really upset, Bunny especially. He says, hey, wait a minute. We're young guys. You don't know what the best of us is. We don't know what the best of us is. So if this is the best for you, it must mean you're not going to be around for much longer. So don't do it. Kong put the album out, called it The Best of the Wailers, and a few weeks later, dropped dead in the studio at 38. So from that point forward, the words of Buddy Wailer enjoyed a little more weight than they had previously. And finally, they turned to a man they knew who was a gopher at Coxon Studio One when they were there, a little short guy named Lee Scratch Perry, whose goal is to hijack the earth. And he is a combination of George Clinton, Frank Zappa, Spike Jones, amazing genius. And I asked him once why he called himself Scratch, and he says, because all teams start from scratch, so check it out, who am I? He makes 2 albums with the Wailers, and without their permission, he goes to London in 1970 and sells them to Chris Blackwell's Trojan Records. And he comes back to Jamaica with $18,000, more money than the Wailers have seen in their entire lives, and doesn't give them a penny. And Bunny almost beats him to death in a nightclub when he finds out. So that falls apart. In '71, Bob goes to Sweden with Johnny Nash to help him write the soundtrack to a Swedish movie that opens and closes in a day. And in '72, toward the end of the year, he finds himself in London with Bunny and Peter. And they're introduced finally to Chris Blackwell. Now all these years, Blackwell has been reissuing Bob's Coxon records in particular on his Island label in England. And he's always been told that the Wailers are ghetto hoodlums and they're very dangerous people, don't have anything to do with them, don't let them near you. And the Wailers have been told by Coxon that this is the big boss, that he never talks to anybody, don't even try to talk to Chris Blackwell, he won't see you. So when they finally meet up, they share these stories and have a little bit of a laugh until Blackwell says to them, what did you do with the hundreds of thousands of pounds of royalties I sent Coxon for your records? And they were just flabbergasted. I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second. I think Blackwell was trying to drive a bigger wedge between Coxon and the Wailers. But this is what he told them. So they ended up on a handshake agreement, nothing on paper, getting $8,000 advance on an album for Chris Blackwell. And that album was Catch a Fire. And in the front room, we had the history of all those records. So there's 2 more points at which I'll speak. And the next one is to tell you about the 2 most important popular music concerts of the 20th century. And if you think both of them involve Bob, you're right. They are unlike any other shows that any artist in the entire 20th century ever did. So the next room is the game room. It honors Bob's physical activities. He loved to play soccer, of course. He could play on a semi-pro level. And he used to play football. He liked to play dominoes. And I'll give you a second to look around at the pictures and stuff. And then we'll talk about the Smile Jamaica and the One Love Peace concerts. Thank you.